It all started quietly, almost too quietly. Our life together had turned into a predictable pattern, and Lisa and I had drifted into what felt like parallel worlds. Most evenings, I was busy at the office, returning home just in time to find her curled up in bed, already half asleep. Communication between us had shrunk to essentials grocery lists, reminders to pick up the dry cleaning, and quick exchanges about bills. It felt like we were two strangers politely sharing a space, rather than a husband and wife. Then, I noticed a change. Lisa started dressing differently, bright colors, trendy outfits that seemed more suited for a night out than the typical art therapy classes she claimed to be attending in the evenings. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, maybe this was her way of shaking off the boredom. We all need a change sometimes, right? But something about it felt different. One evening, just as I was wrapping up a long day at work, my colleague Samantha stopped by my office. She had a look on her face that I couldn't quite read, a mixture of discomfort and concern. "James," she began hesitantly, I saw Lisa last night. She was at that new restaurant, Garibaldi's. I thought you two might have been out together, but when I looked closer, it wasn't you with her." I felt my stomach drop, but managed to keep my voice steady. "Oh, who was she with?" Samantha looked away, almost reluctant to continue. "She was with a guy, a yoga instructor, I think. His name is Jake. I've seen him around town, but they seemed close." Her words hit like a punch. Samantha wasn't the type to spread rumors, and the way she tried to downplay it told me there was more she wasn't saying. I thanked her, brushed it off, and said goodbye. But on the drive home, her words echoed in my mind. Close. What exactly did that mean? As I pulled into the driveway, I saw the glow of lights in the living room window. Lisa was home, probably waiting up, unaware that anything was different. I decided to keep things normal, act like I hadn't heard anything unusual. Confronting her wasn't going to solve anything, not until I knew what I was dealing with. When I walked in, she greeted me with a quick smile, dressed in a casual sweatshirt and jeans, as if she'd been lounging all evening. But the sight of her only fueled the questions swirling in my head. Who was this Jake? How often did they meet? And why had she kept it from me? "Long day?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Yeah, lots of work to catch up on." I forced a smile, slipping off my coat. "You do anything fun?" She shrugged. "Just the usual. Art class and then a quick dinner." She said it so casually, her eyes focused on her phone rather than on me. "Art class. Right." I nodded, playing along, but inside, doubt simmered. Something wasn't adding up, and I had to find out what was going on. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that Samantha might have misunderstood what she saw. Maybe Lisa really had been meeting this Jake character for a casual dinner after her class, just as friends. But no matter how much I tried to brush it off, doubt kept creeping in, like an itch I couldn't scratch. It was in the small changes that my suspicions started to find footing. Lisa, once predictable, was now acting in ways I couldn't quite explain. She would head out for her art therapy classes in outfits that seemed more suited for a night out, bright dresses, heels, perfume. I hadn't seen her dressed like that in ages, not even when we'd go out together. It stung, the idea that she might be dressing up for someone else. Our conversations, too, had taken on a new tone, though not one I could easily define. When I asked her about her evening, she'd gloss over the details, keeping things vague. "Oh, just the usual," she'd say with a quick smile, not looking up from her phone. And then there was her phone itself, always glued to her hand, her screen dimming the moment I entered the room. She'd chuckle at random times, typing rapidly, only to turn the phone face down the moment I glanced her way. One evening, I decided to test her, hoping my paranoia was just that, paranoia. As she got ready to leave, dressed in a red blouse I hadn't seen before, I asked if I could join her. "I could use a break from work," I said casually. "Maybe an evening of art therapy is what I need too." For a split second, her face went blank. Then she forced a smile and laughed, though it sounded forced. "Oh, I don't know if you'd enjoy it, James. It's just a bunch of people talking about their feelings and splashing paint around." She waved her hand dismissively. "Besides, it's kind of my me-time thing. I really need the space to unwind." The firmness in her voice surprised me. She'd never been so possessive about her activities before. I let it go, but as I watched her leave, the doubt grew stronger. Me time was fine, I understood that need, but the way she seemed almost defensive struck me as odd, especially considering we hardly spent any time together anymore. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I decided I couldn't ignore this any longer. The pieces weren't adding up, and every instinct told me something was off. So I took the first step in what I felt was an unavoidable direction. I started watching for clues. Over the next week, I made a point to check our shared bank account, something I hadn't done in months. Sure enough, I found unexpected expenses charges at high-end restaurants, new outfits from boutiques, and even a hotel bar bill from a place downtown. None of these things were part of her usual spending habits. When I asked her about them casually, she shrugged them off, claiming it was just for some art class outings. But since when did she need a hotel bar to unwind? One night, when she returned home, I caught the faint scent of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. It was subtle but unmistakable, lingering in the air as she brushed past me. I asked her about it, jokingly, pretending to be clueless. "Oh, I think it was from one of the guys in class," she said, laughing lightly. "You know how perfume and cologne just sticks to you." Her response might have seemed innocent to anyone else, but I knew better. Lisa wasn't one to shrug off strangers' scents, and certainly not to wear them home without a second thought. I could feel the gap between us widening with every small inconsistency. She'd get texts at odd hours, and when I'd ask who it was, she'd reply with a vague, "just a friend from class." It was during one of these moments that the most troubling thought crept into my mind. Had I already lost her? Had she already decided I was no longer enough? Every small lie, every deflection, felt like a door closing. I felt myself drifting further away from her, held at arm's length by a wall of secrecy that only seemed to grow thicker. The final straw came one evening when she was in the shower. I glanced at her phone on the kitchen counter, lying unguarded. I knew it was a breach of trust, but I couldn't shake the need to know. I picked it up, heart pounding, and unlocked it, hoping to find anything that would put my mind at ease. But what I found was worse than I could have imagined. Messages with someone saved only as J filled her inbox, each one dripping with the kind of warmth and affection she hadn't shown me in months. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow," one message read, followed by a string of heart emojis. Another message from him read, "Last night was perfect. You looked incredible in that red dress." My chest tightened. That red dress, the one she'd worn the night she laughed off my offer to join her at art class. As I scrolled, my hands trembled, reading fragments of plans, compliments, and private jokes I'd never heard before. Their exchanges spoke of comfort, familiarity, a connection that stung to witness. The last message I saw was the one that broke me. "I wish we didn't have to hide like this. Being with you feels right." The shower stopped, and I quickly locked her phone, setting it back on the counter as if nothing had happened. I felt sick, trapped between anger and the painful realization that I might have been wrong to trust her all this time. When she emerged from the bathroom, smiling, as if nothing had changed, I forced myself to act normal, masking the pain swirling within me. But inside, everything had changed. The trust one had once so freely given was gone, and all that remained was a determination to uncover the truth. After discovering those messages, any lingering hope I'd had for an innocent explanation vanished. The reality was undeniable. Lisa had crossed a line. Now, it was time for me to get the full truth, and I was prepared to go to any length to find it. I started with her phone, the device that seemed to hold more answers than she'd ever willingly give me. Late at night, after she'd fallen asleep, I waited patiently until her breathing settled into the rhythm of deep sleep. Slowly, I took her phone from the bedside table and slipped into the hallway. Using a backup software, I quickly cloned the messages and contacts, making sure I'd have access to everything even if she started deleting them. The next day, armed with my new access, I started reading the messages in detail. I saw months of exchanges between Lisa and Jake, messages about meeting up, making plans, and reminiscing about past encounters. It was like stepping into a world she'd carefully hidden, a side of her life she'd built without me. I felt a hollow ache inside me as I read, each message adding to the sense of betrayal. But text messages only told part of the story. I wanted to see how far this had gone and needed more concrete evidence. That evening, I left the office early and drove over to Jake's yoga studio. I parked across the street, far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to keep an eye on the entrance. If Lisa's art therapy class was a lie, I was going to catch her in it. About half an hour later, Lisa's car pulled up. She stepped out, dressed in a sleek black dress that was entirely out of place for any class. As she walked into the building, I noticed her looking around, checking for anyone watching, almost like she sensed someone might catch her. The guilt was written on her face, clear as day. A few minutes later, Jake himself arrived, greeting her with a warm hug that lingered too long to be friendly. They laughed, exchanging a glance that carried a weight I hadn't seen in her eyes for a long time. Watching them together sent a wave of anger through me, but I held back, reminding myself I needed proof. I continued staking out the studio for the next few nights, and each time, the routine repeated itself. Lisa and Jake would meet, spend time alone together, then leave separately as if trying to cover their tracks. It was a small comfort knowing that my suspicions weren't unfounded, but it hurt all the same. I wanted to confront her, to ask her why, but I knew that a confrontation without solid proof would lead to denial, excuses, or worse, her blaming me for pushing her away. I needed to be smart, precise, and thorough. So I decided to take things a step further. I'd get a private investigator involved. I reached out to an investigator named Paul, someone a colleague recommended. He had a reputation for being discreet and thorough, the kind of guy who could get the truth without leaving a trace. After meeting him in a quiet coffee shop, I explained everything: the changes in Lisa, the messages, the meetings with Jake. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, and assured me he'd handle everything. Over the next few days, Paul kept me updated. He followed Lisa when I couldn't, taking photos and collecting timestamps of her meetings with Jake. He captured images of them together at the restaurant, leaving no room for her to twist the truth. Each report he sent added another piece to the puzzle, confirming everything I'd feared. One afternoon, Paul called with a breakthrough. "James, I have something you need to see," he said, his tone heavier than usual. "Meet me at my office." I arrived within the hour, my heart pounding. Paul handed me an envelope, filled with photos of Lisa and Jake in various settings outside the studio, at restaurants, even stepping out of a hotel together late one night. My stomach twisted at the sight, my anger now mixed with a dull, aching sadness. "She's been seeing him for a while," Paul confirmed, his voice sympathetic. "Based on the evidence, it's clear this isn't just a casual friendship." I sat there, staring at the photos, trying to absorb the reality I'd spent weeks piecing together. All the little details, the evasions, the changes in her behavior, it all made sense now. The woman I thought I knew had been living a life I was barely a part of, and it left me questioning everything. After thanking Paul, I left his office, the evidence heavy in my hands. Driving home, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, but with it came a strange sense of calm. I now had everything I needed. Lisa had made her choice, and I had mine. There would be no empty confrontation, no begging for answers she would never honestly give. No, this called for something different, something she wouldn't see coming. It was time to let her see just how it felt to be the one deceived. Holding that thick envelope of evidence felt surreal. This wasn't just suspicion or speculation anymore. Lisa's affair was an undeniable reality. All the pieces were laid out in front of me, and every photo, every timestamp, every location confirmed what I hadn't wanted to believe. The woman I'd once trusted with everything had made a mockery of that trust. The following evening, I sat in my car, just a few blocks from Jake's yoga studio, waiting. I knew Lisa would be there, wrapped in the lie of her art therapy class. I checked my watch, and sure enough, a few minutes later, her car pulled up. She parked, adjusted her hair in the rearview mirror, and then stepped out in a fitted dress and heels, an outfit that had nothing to do with art and everything to do with impressing someone. She looked around quickly, like she always did, before heading into the building. The sight made my chest tighten, but I stayed calm, reminding myself that I needed this last confirmation. I followed quietly, making my way around the side of the building where a row of windows gave me a partial view of the studio interior. A few moments later, Jake appeared, greeting her with that same too familiar smile. They exchanged a look that said more than words ever could, and then he leaned in, brushing a hand along her arm before embracing her fully. It was painfully clear that this wasn't the first time they'd held each other like this. They laughed softly, locked in a conversation I'd never be privy to, sharing a world I'd been shut out of for months. Watching them together, I felt something shift inside me. The sadness I'd been holding onto all this time started to dissolve, making room for something sharper, more resolved. If she could do this so casually, so brazenly, then I wasn't the one who should feel guilty or ashamed. I stayed long enough to see them leave together, her hand resting on his arm as they walked out of the building, heading to his car. They drove off, unaware that I'd been there to witness every stolen moment. When I got home, I sat at the dining table, my mind buzzing with everything I'd learned and seen. Lisa arrived later, looking relaxed and cheerful, as if she'd spent her evening doing nothing more exciting than brushing up on painting techniques. I forced myself to act as usual, greeting her with a casual nod, and she breezed past me, oblivious to the fact that her secret was no longer hidden. That night, as she slept beside me, the evidence sat in a drawer by my side of the bed, a silent testament to her betrayal. I'd spent so many nights plagued by doubt, questioning her loyalty and blaming myself. But now, with the truth laid bare, I saw things differently. I knew that a confrontation alone wouldn't give me closure. I wanted her to feel what it was like to be deceived, to experience the pain she'd inflicted on me without a second thought. The next day, I made a decision. If Lisa could look outside our marriage for comfort, then so could I. I knew just where to start. Karen, her older sister. Karen and I had always shared an easy rapport, and there'd been times when her empathy had felt like more than just sibling loyalty. Maybe she'd sensed my loneliness, the distance growing between Lisa and me. We'd exchanged more than a few long glances over the years, and I had a feeling that she'd understand everything without me saying a word. The following week, I met with Karen under the guise of needing someone to talk to. As we sat across from each other at a quiet cafe, I opened up about the distance between Lisa and me, carefully omitting certain details. Karen listened intently, her hand resting on mine in silent support. She didn't ask too many questions, and when I hinted at how isolated I felt, she nodded, almost as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Our meetings became frequent, comfortable, and somehow more fulfilling than any recent interaction I'd had with Lisa. Karen was attentive, warm, and genuine, qualities that felt like a balm to my fractured self-esteem. And somewhere in those hours we spent together, what started as a form of revenge grew into something real. She filled a space that had been empty for too long. The night of our family dinner arrived, a setting that brought everyone together under the same roof. Sitting at the table, I waited for the right moment, my patience and restraint building to this one point. Halfway through the meal, I turned to Lisa and asked, "So, how's Jake?" The shock on her face was priceless. She stammered, caught off guard, her fork slipping from her hand. What are you talking about?" "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied calmly, watching her face turn pale. The room fell silent, all eyes shifting between us. Before she could deny anything, I added, "In fact, since we're on the topic of honesty, maybe I should mention that I haven't been entirely alone myself." I glanced at Karen, whose expression remained composed, as if we'd planned every moment. Lisa looked between us, realization dawning painfully in her eyes. She had no idea that her betrayal had paved the way for something far deeper than she'd ever expected. The room was frozen in silence after my revelation, but I felt strangely calm, almost detached. I had expected this moment to be explosive, chaotic. Instead, it felt like a quiet, final act, one I'd carefully prepared for and was now carrying out with precision. Lisa's face went from shock to anger as she processed my words. "Are you serious?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I met her gaze steadily, letting her see that there was no doubt, no hesitation on my part. Karen, still seated beside me, placed a comforting hand on my arm. The small gesture was just enough to confirm that this wasn't some passing whim for either of us. She'd been the one who'd picked up my broken pieces and given me strength, and now, here she was, unashamed and unafraid, standing by my side. How could you do this? Lisa stammered, looking at me with wide, searching eyes, as if she couldn't quite believe that the tables had turned. You're asking me how I could do this? I replied, my voice level. Lisa, I watched you lie to me for months. You were the one who started this, who chose to betray us. I just found someone who actually respected me. The words came out with a surprising ease, and it felt good to finally say them out loud. The family members around the table shifted uncomfortably, some looking at me with disbelief, others at Lisa with judgment in their eyes. It was clear they were piecing things together, realizing that this confrontation had been building for some time. The truth was now out in the open, and neither of us could hide from it anymore. Lisa's eyes turned toward her sister, narrowing with betrayal. Karen, how could you? Karen met her gaze, her voice calm but firm. I didn't take anything that wasn't already gone, Lisa. You checked out of this marriage a long time ago, you know that. I watched you drift away from James, and frankly, I couldn't stand to see what it was doing to him. She leaned back, arms crossed, her expression unyielding. Someone had to show him he deserved better. Lisa shook her head, speechless. I could see the betrayal was hitting her hard, and though part of me felt a pang of sympathy, the rest of me held firm. She had broken our trust first, turning to Jake in secret, hiding behind her art class excuses while building an entirely separate life. And now, she was experiencing the same pain, the same sense of loss and abandonment that I'd been living with for months. At that moment, I realized my revenge had taken on a life of its own, far beyond any satisfaction I might have expected. What started as a response to her betrayal had grown into something deeper, a connection with Karen that went beyond simple retaliation. Being with her felt natural, easy. She knew me in ways Lisa had long since forgotten. I turned back to Lisa. This isn't about hurting you, Lisa. But maybe now you understand what it feels like to be left behind, to be treated as optional. My words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw her expression soften, as if the weight of her own actions were finally sinking in. Karen gently squeezed my hand under the table. James and I, we didn't plan this to hurt you. But you left him behind, Lisa. You left him feeling like he wasn't enough. She took a breath, her voice steady. If you hadn't been so absorbed in Jake and whatever you thought you were missing, maybe things would have been different. Lisa looked down, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't know. I thought you didn't care anymore. Her admission surprised me, though it didn't change the reality of what she'd done. Maybe that's the problem, Lisa, I replied. You assumed things without ever asking. You left me in the dark and pushed me away. And eventually, I found someone who was willing to listen, who was there for me in a way you hadn't been in a long time. The confrontation left everyone in stunned silence, the truth now raw and exposed. I could see the turmoil on Lisa's face as she tried to process everything. She seemed caught between anger, regret, and something that almost looked like guilt. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. The weight of suspicion, the long nights of questioning and doubt, were gone. I was finally free from the uncertainty that had been eating away at me. As the dinner wound down, Lisa quietly excused herself, her face pale, her usual confidence shattered. She looked at me once more, her eyes searching for any sign that things could return to the way they were. But that door was closed, and we both knew it. Karen and I left shortly after, walking out together with a quiet sense of solidarity. We didn't need words. The unspoken understanding between us was enough. What had started as revenge had turned into something I couldn't have anticipated, a new beginning, built on trust and respect. And this time, I was sure I wouldn't be left behind. The family birthday dinner was already tense by the time I arrived. I could feel Lisa's nervous energy as soon as I stepped in. She tried to act normal, but her forced smiles and restless glances toward her phone betrayed her. Tonight was the night I'd planned for, the night I'd put all the cards on the table. We were halfway through the main course, everyone chatting, when I cleared my throat. Lisa, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "How's Jake?" The table fell silent. All eyes turned to Lisa, her face draining of color as she struggled to respond. She stammered, trying to laugh it off. What do you mean? Jake? He's just a friend from art class." The reaction was exactly what I expected. She was flustered, desperate to regain control. I kept my gaze steady, letting her see that I knew everything. "A friend from art class," I repeated slowly. "Is that all he is, Lisa? Just a friend?" Lisa's expression shifted from confusion to anger, then fear, as she realized I wasn't bluffing. "James, I don't know what you're trying to say, but you're making a scene. This isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it is," I replied, my tone sharper now. "I've sat by quietly for months, watching you come and go, lying to my face every chance you got. Do you think I'm that blind? Do you really think I haven't noticed the changes, the secrets, the late nights, the excuses?" She looked around, her gaze darting to our family members, searching for support. But no one spoke. Even her parents, usually quick to defend her, were silent, waiting for her to explain. Then I turned to Karen, sitting beside me with a quiet, steady presence. "And since we're being honest here," I continued, "maybe now's the time to say that I haven't exactly been alone through all this." Lisa's eyes went wide, darting from me to Karen, who remained composed. "Karen?" Lisa whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You and James?" "Yes," Karen replied, her voice calm but firm. "It wasn't planned, Lisa. But when I saw what you were doing to him, I couldn't stand by and watch you tear him apart. You betrayed me?" Lisa's voice was barely a whisper now, filled with a mixture of shock, hurt, and anger. Her expression shifted as she tried to process this new betrayal, the reality settling on her like a weight she couldn't bear. "Funny, isn't it?" I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my tone. "You're upset that your sister was there for me, but what did you expect, Lisa? I was alone, wondering every night where my wife really was, watching you slip further away. And while you were out there with Jake, Karen was the one who was there for me, actually caring about what I was going through." Lisa's shock morphed into something harsher, her eyes narrowing. "So this is your revenge? To hurt me by doing this with my own sister?" "No," I replied, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "This isn't about revenge, Lisa. This is about finding the support and honesty that I haven't gotten from you in a long time. You left our marriage the moment you decided to lie to me, to go behind my back with Jake." The weight of her betrayal, now laid bare, seemed to sink in as she stared at the table, unable to meet my gaze. Karen finally broke the silence, her voice gentle but firm. "Lisa, I tried to talk to you about this, to get you to see what you were doing to James. But you were too wrapped up in Jake to care." Lisa's face flushed with anger. "You think you're so righteous, Karen? That you're somehow better because you swooped in to save him? You had no right." Karen met her gaze, unflinching. "Maybe I didn't. But someone had to care about James when you didn't. Someone had to be there for him when you were lying, when you were out with another man." A tense silence settled over the room as the full scope of Lisa's actions came into focus for everyone. She looked around, hoping someone would speak up for her, but the expressions around the table were a mix of disappointment, shock, and pity. Her parents shifted uncomfortably, her father finally muttering, "Lisa, we thought better of you." The impact of those words hit her visibly, and she lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of all she had put me through. Finally, Lisa looked up, her eyes meeting mine. But instead of the love or understanding that once connected us, there was only hurt and regret. "James, I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking, but it was too late. I gave a small nod, acknowledging her words, but knowing they held no power anymore. "Lisa, there's no going back from this. We both made choices. I just hope you realize the cost of yours." I stood up, Karen following beside me. As we walked out together, I felt the finality of it all settle around me. There was no more doubt, no more wondering. Lisa's betrayal was now fully exposed, but more importantly, so was my resolve to move forward. And with Karen beside me, I knew I finally could. Walking out of that dinner, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight I'd carried for far too long had finally been lifted. Beside me, Karen was calm, offering a steady presence that felt grounding. We didn't speak much as we left. There wasn't a need for words. The truth had been laid bare, and now it was time to look forward. The weeks following that night brought a mixture of emotions. On one hand, I felt the inevitable grief of a life I'd built with Lisa that had unraveled in front of family and friends. There were memories, shared dreams, and years of companionship. But each day also made it clearer that what we had was no longer real, that the warmth and trust we once shared had been a mirage gone long before I even knew. Karen and I continued to see each other, taking things slowly, carefully. What had started as an unexpected connection turned into something real, something rooted in mutual respect and understanding. She understood my hurt, knew my insecurities, and never made me feel like I had to hide them. With her, I didn't feel the need to pretend or put up walls. Instead, I felt understood and valued, in a way I hadn't in years. One evening, we sat together at her place, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. She looked over at me, a quiet question in her eyes. "Are you sure this is what you want, James?" she asked, her tone gentle. "I know it's complicated, but I want you to be happy, whether that's with me or not." I smiled, taking her hand in mine. "Karen, I'm more certain now than ever. You've shown me what real honesty and care look like. I never thought I'd find this after everything, but here we are." She returned my smile, relief evident on her face, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine sense of happiness, unclouded by doubt or betrayal. Our relationship had grown naturally, without the bitterness of revenge, transforming into something that felt both healing and hopeful. As for Lisa, we kept communication to a minimum. The process of ending our marriage was civil, but distant. She reached out a few times, apologizing in ways that felt genuine yet too late. She confessed that she hadn't realized how far she'd drifted or how deeply she'd hurt me, but I found myself feeling strangely detached from her apologies. There was no anger left, only a quiet acceptance that our paths had diverged, and that was the best thing for both of us. In time, I found myself able to forgive her, not to forget, but to release the bitterness I'd held onto for so long. It didn't excuse her choices, but I realized holding on to anger would only hold me back. With Karen by my side, I could see a life ahead of me where the past no longer defined who I was or what I deserved. Months passed, and I found myself at peace with the new life I was building. Karen and I moved in together, creating a home filled with warmth and honesty, two things that had been missing for so long. Each day felt like a step toward a new chapter, one where trust wasn't a fragile thing, but a foundation we both nurtured. Looking back, I realized that losing Lisa had ultimately led me to a new understanding of love and self-worth. I had spent so long questioning myself, wondering where I'd gone wrong. But now, I saw clearly that Lisa's choices were hers alone. I wasn't responsible for her actions, and I didn't need to bear that weight anymore. As Karen and I sat on our porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a contentment I hadn't thought possible. This was my new beginning, free from betrayal, built on trust and genuine care. And with Karen beside me, I knew that, finally, I was exactly where I was meant to be.